My history teacher had a crush on me. Story time. When I was in ninth grade, I had a really creepy history teacher. And by creepy, I mean he used to be really handsy. Whenever I had his class throughout the whole period, he would randomly come up to me and start massaging my neck or rub on my lower back. But the creepiest thing he did is whenever I asked him a question, he would sit next to me and place his hand on my inner thigh area. Mind you guys that he was in his 50s and I was only 14 at the time. So the day I found out he had a crush on me was actually Valentine's Day. During homeroom, everyone was receiving candygrams, which was a lollipop and a note attached to it. So I received one, and when I looked at the note, it was from my history teacher. And it said, "I know you're not 18 yet, but you should still hit me up anyway." And then he put his number in the note. Ugh. So of course I had to report him, and he got in a lot of trouble. My sister can see ghosts. Story time. When we were younger, my sister used to claim that she could see ghosts all the time, but I never really believed her until this one night. I decided that I was going to sleep with my sister in her bedroom this night. A night that I will never forget. Now, my sister is someone who snores, very loud, I might add. So whenever I would sleep in her bedroom, I would hear her snoring throughout the whole night. Well, on this particular night, I could hear her snoring, but then all of a sudden she gets silent. I look over to see if she's okay, and she's propped up in bed and pointing at the closet. And she's kind of freaking me out, so I'm like, "Are you okay?" And she turns to me with this really scared look on her face, and she says, "There's someone in the closet." And as soon as she says that, something spooks her and she runs out of the room. But the creepiest part about this whole situation is that after she left, I heard footsteps run out the room after her. My mom tried to drown this little girl. Story time. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, my family got a pool, so they signed me up for swimming lessons. And I loved everything about the class except for this one girl who we're gonna name Pamela. She was the worst. And every time we had a class, when nobody was looking, she would hold my head underwater for an extremely long time. Now, normally, my dad would take me to my swimming lessons, but this time, my mom ended up taking me. And my mom does not play when it comes to her kids. So during class, Pamela thought nobody was looking, so she started holding me underwater again. However, my mom saw. My mom ends up running over, grabbing me out of the water, and then she grabs Pamela by the head, dunks her under the water, and holds her there for a really long time. Thank God the instructor was there because I'm convinced my neighbor is a serial killer. Story time. So I have this really creepy neighbor. And we always catch him doing these really weird things. Like, for instance, we saw him coming out of the woods late at night covered in dirt. He even got the police called on him once because he was peeking through our other neighbor's window. Like, the man is just really weird. So a couple nights ago, it had to be like 1 in the morning. My family was woken up by loud banging on the door. Now we're all freaking out, so my dad goes to answer the door. But when he opens the door, my neighbor is standing there, and he was covered in what looked like blood. So my dad obviously questions him, and he's like, "What do you want? Like, what are you doing here?" And my neighbor's like, "Oh, sorry, I thought your kids would be home alone. I just came to check on them." Well, my dad was not liking that answer, so he started arguing with the man. My mom ends up calling the police. When they got there, they couldn't even really arrest him because he didn't do anything wrong. And I was like, what about the blood? My uncle tried to kidnap me. Story time. Growing up, I was really close to my uncle. I mean, he was like my best friend. But then something happened between him and the rest of my family, and I wasn't allowed to see him anymore. So at this point, a week had passed since I seen my uncle. I was at school about to get on the bus to go home, but I got a text message from my uncle. And it said, "Hey, I'm out front. Your dad asked me to pick you up." And I thought it was weird, but I didn't think too much about it. So instead of getting on the bus, I found him and got in his car. And once I got in the car, he started acting really strange. So I sent a text to my dad and let him know that uncle was taking me home. Or so I thought he was taking me home. But instead of going to my house, he started driving past my neighborhood. And right in that moment, my dad texted me back and said, "Get out of that car. Do not go with your uncle. He is a bad man." So the moment we came to a red light, I jumped out of the car and started running for my life. And instead of chasing after me, he peeled off. And he was never seen again.
Story time about how I found out my boyfriend was married. I had just moved to a new state and decided to download Bumble to meet new people. One day, I matched with this great guy named Alex. He had a good job, his own house, never married, and no kids. We lived in the same town and we started spending a lot of time together. However, I noticed that Alex started doing some weird things. He started coming over unannounced. Before he left, he would always check to make sure that the doors and windows were locked, and when I wasn't with him, he was always blowing up my phone constantly asking what I was doing. A few months into our relationship, he introduced me to his family and I introduced him to mine. It also turned out that we had a ton of mutual friends. He knew my new best friend Laura and her husband from the gym. When we made the connection, he made it clear that he didn't want me being friends with her anymore. Anytime I would bring her up in conversation, he would get agitated. Laura and I were both teachers at the same school. One afternoon, she came storming into my classroom. She told me that she had just had a girls' night with the girls from the gym. They were all showing pictures of their wedding since one of the girls recently got engaged. That's when she noticed that my boyfriend was in pictures with another woman. It turns out he was the husband of one of the girls that she was having dinner with. Part 2 of how I found out my boyfriend was married. When my best friend showed me the pictures of my boyfriend and his wife, I was livid. I saw red and immediately texted him telling him to come over to my house to talk. He ended up calling me on the way home from work but refused to come over to my house until I told him what I wanted to talk about. When I told him, he automatically started blaming my best friend and her husband for telling his business, saying it wasn't theirs to tell. I felt so angry and betrayed, but most of all, I felt stupid for not knowing. I told him it was over and that I was done with him. I didn't hear from him again after that. He moved away and no one at the gym had seen him either. A few months after everything happened, his wife posted on Facebook saying that she was getting a divorce. It turns out that he had beaten her up so badly that she ended up in the hospital. This abuse had apparently been going on for months. I felt that it was a blessing in disguise that I had gotten out of that relationship. Seeing how controlling he was within just a few months of dating, who knows what would have happened if I didn't find out and kept dating him. Luckily, I haven't seen or heard of him since 2018 and I hope that I never do. Storytime about how I had to choose between my family and the love of my life. I come from a pretty well-off family. Growing up, I never had to worry about anything because it was always taken care of by my parents. They were pretty religious and we would attend church every week. From a young age, I knew that I was attracted to girls. I also knew that my parents wouldn't accept it, so I buried my feelings deep. Luckily, I was never tempted because I never met anyone that I had feelings for. Fast forward to my senior year of high school. I was on the volleyball team and a new girl named Juliet had transferred to our school and joined the team. We quickly became friends, but there was always a lingering connection between us. I had easily developed a crush on her, but I knew that I couldn't act on it. During spring break, we went to a party and liquid courage led me to confessing my feelings for her. When I told her everything, she kissed me and I felt butterflies fluttering in my stomach. We secretly started dating after this and only my older sister and best friend knew about it. However, the more time I spent with Juliet, the more I knew that she was the one. One night, I finally built up the courage to tell my parents. Unfortunately, the reaction was worse than I expected. They yelled, cried, and told me they'd never accept it. Then they told me they would cut me off and kick me out if I kept seeing her. I was scared and didn't know what to do. Part 2 of how I had to choose between my family and the love of my life. After my parents gave me the ultimatum, I was terrified. The next day after school, I met up with Juliet with the intention of breaking things off. When I told her what happened, she comforted me and told me that it was okay. She said she understood it was an impossible choice and wouldn't blame me for choosing my family. She just wanted me to be happy and do what was best for me. Juliet loved me enough to let me go, even though I knew it was killing her. This was the deciding factor for me. As much as my parents loved me, they didn't accept me for who I am, but Juliet always had. While my parents were at work, we went to my house and packed my things. I called my older sister and she took me in with open arms. I cried to her for a while because I knew that I would never speak to my parents again. A few years later, my sister was getting married and she wanted me to be her maid of honor. Juliet and I were still together and happier than ever. I knew that my family was going to be at the wedding, but I didn't care what they thought anymore. I walked in hand with Juliet and saw my parents' face drop at our entrance. The rest of the family made eyes as well, but we ignored them and enjoyed our night. A year later, I proposed to Juliet and she said yes. Even though I lost my parents, I don't regret my decision. Eventually, we'll make our own family. This is why you shouldn't use your real name online. When I was younger, I was really into meeting friends online and I always used my real name as my user on the websites. After I turned 18, I matched with someone that lived a few states away. His name was Matt and he was 21 years old. We quickly became friends and soon our friendship turned into a virtual friends with benefits situation. We talked